There is a free wireless internet signal all across North America, and nobody has figured out how to use it. It's like the Force. Sorry, have you seen Star Wars?
No.
BlackBerry, such an engaging, fascinating story. Matt, we're going to start with you. What was your gateway into this? Because you're not a big BlackBerry guy.
No, I never owned one, never used one. My gateway was that when I read the book, I really fell in love with these two guys. And I thought, oh, I would love to see good actors portray these people. One, because nobody knows who they are. And two, because they did things that are extremely risky and very much of themselves. Like you can say a lot about Jim and Mike, but you cannot say that they are not totally themselves. And they really don't bend for anybody. And I just, as soon as I made that connection, I was like, oh, this will be a great movie.
Jay, I know you're fiercely proud of telling Canadian stories, and this is such a uniquely Canadian story. What was your takeaway from BlackBerry?
Oh, just that it was like, you know, that what these nerds in KW in the end of the 90s did helped set the table in a pretty profound way for the world as we kind of recognize it today in the 21st century. How people interact with one another, how people participate in the world, globalization at every step of the way. Smartphones are kind of they're integral, and this was the one. This was the first one, and so everything good and bad about now is started in this lab above a diner in Kitchener, you know, and so it's like that in itself makes it worth talking about. The fact that it happened in a super crazy, colorful, compelling way really helps. But the big takeaway is we flew too close to the sun, but in utter anonymity. There's no cult of personality around these guys like there is around, say, a Zuckerberg or a Jobs or a Bill Gates or any of these people. These are not household names, you know. So for all those reasons, it felt like a kind of tragic, romantic, beautiful, sad, funny thing that is like speaks to the dysfunction of being Canadian.
Glenn, your portrayal of Jim Balsillie is just so magnificent. I loved watching it. What went into that? Did you reach out to him? How did you generate that character?
My inspiration really all came from the script and conversations with Matt. But you know, I don't know, Jay, maybe you can relate to this, but as an actor, you know, I always know that I'm drawn to a role when I catch myself reading the script, and as I'm reading the script, I start acting out the role, which I think a lot of like you know, acting teachers and acting books would tell you that's exactly the wrong thing to do, right? To just go with your immediate gut response. I think I like to start from a place of inspiration. You know, whereas most, I feel like acting books and schools are like, no, you should go in with no preconceived notions and then build the character from nothing. And I'm like, I understand that philosophically, but in reality, I think it's bullshit. I think so when I read a script that's as good as the script that Matt and Matt Miller wrote, I draw most of my inspiration from what it makes me feel the first, second time I read it. And so, you know, my approach is really built on that initial reaction. But it was so fun.
Question for all three of you. Watching this story, it goes from a Rocky-like success story to almost like a Shakespearean tragedy. Matt, we'll start with you, but is there a point in telling this story or learning about the characters involved in the creation of BlackBerry where you look at it and you say, oh my gosh, this is where they went wrong?
Yeah, I get asked that a lot, like what is the one thing I can point to? And I think if there was one thing to point to, the film wouldn't be so interesting. And I like the idea that even with the reality that we present in the film, I think audiences are still left debating what exactly it was that these guys went wrong with. But my pat answer is that I think that the CEOs splitting the role And having two men in charge of this company was a big mistake, because I think it meant that there wasn't a singular vision for what the company was supposed to do. And you'll notice in the film a number of times, they each tacitly rely on one another to solve problems that they do not want to face themselves. And if you have that in your back pocket, you will always use it, and that is how they'll get you. Because there's a great line where Jim says, Mike will figure it out, and he didn't. And so you may be able to find the beginning of the end in that line of dialogue. But again, I'm not prescriptive. I don't know exactly what it was.
Jay, what about you? Did you, playing Mike, was there a point where you felt like Mike passed a point of no return?
Certainly, you know, he kind of ends, he goes through what I've been calling it like a sort of Tony Montana phase. Like he ends up kind of too big for his own britches and kind of gets high in his own supply and believes the hype. And in doing so is when he kind of breaks he doesn't have many rules, but they're pretty strong and they're pretty rigid. And he finally breaks the one that is kind of like existential for him, which is about manufacturing outside of Canada. And so I think it's like you watch a creature from one ecosystem, you know, the research and motion lab above the diner, that's where he's from. That's the kind of, that's the jungle that he belongs to. And you watch him try to become what he thinks the rest of the world needs him to be, and it kind of spoils him. So I think at a certain point, his biggest failing narratively, I'm not talking about the real guy, I can't, but in our story, the moment where he loses is when he lacks the foresight to understand that they are now behind the game.
Jim, he gets enraptured with trying to get an NHL franchise. Is there a point you were able to look at where things kind of come apart for him?
I mean, one specific point, no. I mean, I think one of the only reasons something can succeed in such a massive way is if you have a singular drive to constantly make that thing the best possible thing it can be. And I do think that once you become distracted by a million other things and a million other interests, then and you start to kind of let it coast on its own fumes, I think that's where you run into trouble. I mean, I think within the context of the film, him being distracted and wanting to so badly to buy an NHL team was the reason. But I think Jim would tell you in reality, he's like, you know, I think he would tell you it was a million other things and not that. I mean, I think he said in an article somewhere that he spent 10 times the amount of time training for triathlons than he did dealing with NHL business. So, but within the film, I would say, yeah, that.
I know how to market it, and I know who we can sell it to. But I want 50% of the company, and I've got to be CEO.
I don't know who you think you are, but
Deal. Are you joking?